I tried every method of bringing my bike on a plane. In this video, I'll talk about the pros and cons of each method so you can decide which method works best for you. Before we get started though, you should know that every airline has slightly different rules about how to bring bikes on. So you're going to want to go to the sporting goods page on every airline's website, and you're going to want to look for what their specific policies are around bikes and what they want you to do and how much they charge. So if you decided to bring a bike on your next trip, here are the ways that you can do it. I'll start with the easiest method and move on to the more complicated methods as we go along. So let's get started. The first method is not bringing your bike at all. You would rent a bike or maybe buy something at your destination. If this method works for you, you could skip the rest of the video. But I wanted to mention it here because I wanted to discuss why you want to bring your bike in the first place. For one thing, I always prefer to have a bike that I'm familiar with. I know what my bikes are capable of. I know they'll be comfortable for long hours in the saddle. And when you're renting a bike, you might only have a few options to choose from at the rental place. Besides the rental place possibly having a cheap, crappy, slow bike, it might also not be a good size for you. It might not fit just the way how you want it. This could make the trip really uncomfortable. Another irritating part of renting a bike is you have to return it, which means potentially you have to go out of your way and you have to work around the rental place's hours of operation. It may seem like a small gripe, but imagine you have a morning flight on a Monday and the rental place is closed on a Sunday. Something like that, you might end up having to cut your trip short by a whole day. Also, renting a bike for more than a week or two could be very expensive, so you probably want to bring your bike if you're going on a longer trip. That said, if you don't have a bike that fits the style of trip that you want to go on, renting might actually be the better option. Also, shorter trips, it could be easier just to rent a bike and not worry about all of the effort that it takes to bring a bike on your trip. I actually did this on my Baja trip just because I wanted to have a mountain bike and I didn't really have one that was, I guess, ideal for the terrain. I did, however, bring my own saddle and my own bags because I wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to be in pain the whole trip. So what I consider to be the easiest method of actually flying with your bike is using a standard cardboard box. This method requires the smallest amount of disassembly, reassembly, and it provides pretty good protection for your bike. Most bike shops have their bikes delivered in these, and they will gladly give them to you if you ask nicely. To pack it is really simple. You just need to take the pedals off. Usually you take your front wheel off, turn your handlebars sideways, and you're good to go. Occasionally, depending on the size of your bike and the size of the box, you may actually need to take your handlebars off. Also, if you have a lot of racks and packs and stuff like that, you may need to take that stuff off as well to get it to fit better. I also recommend protecting your rear derailleur a little bit. So sometimes I'll either unscrew it or I'll pack it with some bubble wrap or something like that to make sure it doesn't get damaged when it's in transit. Once I get to my destination, the reassembly is super quick. And the extra space in the box actually leaves a lot of room for panniers and racks and things that I might need along the bike. The negative side of using this method is the box is kind of bulky and hard to maneuver. I end up taking a taxi to the airport a lot because it's really difficult to bring it on any kind of public transit. So a bike box will always be oversized, and a lot of airlines will charge you a bike fee. A lot of times it can be very expensive, up to $150. Those policies are changing. A lot of airlines are making bikes easier to bring, and a lot of times it'll just count as your one check bag. You'll have to check with your specific airline to see what the policy is. Just be careful how much you actually pack inside your box, because while a lot of airlines won't charge you a fee for having the bike, they will still charge you a fee if the box is overweight. The last consideration is you need to figure out what you're going to do about your way back. If I'm flying in and out of the same destination, I try to book the first and last night at the same hotel or wherever I'm staying, and that way I can ask them to hold on to it. In all my times of doing this, no one's ever said no. If you are flying out of a different location, if you have a one-way trip, it's a little bit more tricky to actually have to source a box at the end. In bigger cities with lots of bike shops, it's really not a problem. You can go to a bunch of different bike stores and somebody will help you out. But smaller places maybe don't have bike stores or they don't get a lot of bikes delivered. It could be a little bit more tricky. And you may be in a situation where you're getting a bunch of smaller supermarket boxes and taping them back together, which can be a bit of a hassle. So the next easiest method of traveling with your bike is to buy a folding bike for your trip. There's a variety of different folding bikes. Here's an example of a 20-inch simple folding bike that I took to Mexico. These are not very expensive. Because they fold very small, all you have to do is wrap them in something and you can avoid airline fees and just take it as a regular checked piece of luggage. I recommend bubble wrap and cardboard on the inside. A lot of these have very large front chain rings and they're kind of easy to bend, and that's actually what happened to me in my Mexico trip. A huge benefit of this method is you don't have to store a box. You can have a small bag with you that you can pack and take along on your trip, and then you don't even have to fly out of the same place. The downside is obviously you're stuck with a folding bike. I've seen many people tour the whole planet on like a 20-inch folding bike, but they're somewhat unusual handling and not everybody will find them fun to ride. Yeah, small wheels don't tend to handle off-road sections very well, and I probably wouldn't want to be riding one in an area with a lot of climbing. They were actually really good on the Yucatan trip though, because it's fairly flat, well paved, and because it's warm I didn't have to carry that much stuff. So the third method of traveling with your bike is actually a lot more complicated than the first two. This method is to basically hide a regular bike in a bag. And what this entails is essentially making the bike really, really small. The benefit of this method is you don't have to buy a specific bike, like the folding bike situation, and basically airlines won't know it's a bike, so they won't be able to charge you fees if that's something that your airline does. So I did this on my trip to the Czech Republic. The bike I brought was this cyclocross bike with 700C wheels, so pretty much a standard bike. I took it apart as small as I could, which required taking out the fork, taking out the crankset, just really taking everything apart super small. I bought like a really large canvas bag and packed it in there. It took quite a bit of effort. It takes a lot longer than, let's say, the cardboard box method. But here's a photo of what it looked like next to a regular bike. You can see it's a lot smaller and wouldn't really raise a lot of suspicion at the airline counter. So the bag that I bought was about 30 by 30 by 10, which is quite a bit larger than 62 linear inches. But as you can see, it was not packed as like a square, so it's very difficult to measure. You'd need like a protractor and stuff to figure out exactly what the linear inches is of something like this. And it doesn't look very big, so the airlines really didn't bother me coming back or going out. Yeah, the airline staff didn't give me any trouble, and I just checked it as my one-check bag. As with the folding bike method, I took the bag, folded it up, and brought it along for the ride. It was a little bit of extra bulk, but it wasn't too bad. It also made flying in and out of different airports really simple. We flew into Berlin and flew out of Prague, so we didn't have to worry about sourcing anything when we were preparing to leave. There's several cons to this method, however. For one thing, it's really difficult to stuff a bike in a bag. It took me probably over an hour to actually get it in, and once it was in, there's not a lot of room for bubble wrap, cardboard, anything to protect your bike, so you really are taking a risk with the airline throwing a big heavy suitcase on top and smashing your bike. On the trip, when I did this, actually on the way back, my derailleur hanger was a little bit bent and I wound up having to replace it. So you're definitely taking a risk if you are trying out this method. Also, obviously, like I said, disassembly, reassembly takes a really long time. So, and you need to be pretty mechanically savvy to be able to do this when you're traveling. The last method that I'm going to cover in this video is to buy a travel frame. The two main systems out there are S&S couplers and Ritchie breakaway, and both of these systems allow the frame to be disconnected in the middle. Makes it super easy to pack, and unlike a lot of folding bikes, what you get with one of these systems is a bike that really rides like a normal bike. So you can set it up how you like to ride, and it doesn't actually add any sort of trouble to your setup. So there are specific bike boxes and bags that come for these types of frames. They usually will pack down to an airline-friendly size, so you won't have any oversized charges. When I've done this, I've usually brought this plastic case, and it's kind of great because it has wheels and it's also very lightweight. So with like a steel touring bike all packed up, including the case, usually is under 50 pounds. So don't have to worry about overweight fees. The trouble with this setup is kind of similar to the last method. It's kind of hard to pack. It only really fits one kind of way. I always end up having to take the tires off the wheels because it won't close with the wheels on. So it usually takes me, also about an hour to really like get everything just right. And it's also takes a lot of effort to reassemble once I arrive to my destination. Being that the bike just about barely fits inside the case, I always end up having to take my rack, my panniers, anything additional that I need with me as my carry-on because I'm not able to fit it inside the box. Yeah, something like fenders, I wouldn't even try to fit into something like this. The other downside is these bikes are pretty expensive. The Traveler's Check costs about 3 times as much for just the frame compared to the regular Cross-Check, which is actually the same frame, just without the couplers. It's, I think, a worthwhile investment if you travel with your bike a lot and you expect to be taking a lot of flights because it really does make the process a little easier. It's a lot nicer to wheel a small case like this through an airport than it is to carry a giant bike box. So I think this list is a pretty comprehensive list of all the reasonable ways to carry a bike on a plane. There are, of course, other methods that I didn't talk about. An example that I read a lot about on the internet is people like to just take their bike, put it in a clear plastic bag, maybe just take the pedals off or something like that. The idea behind this method is people see it's a bike, so they're going to handle it with a little bit more care, and it's not just going to be like tossed around. I'm personally not so trusting of the airline staff to do something like that. And also a lot of airlines, when you read their policies, they won't allow bikes like that. They want at least some kind of packing to be done before they accept it. So I'm probably not going to try this method. The other kind of obvious method is you can buy yourself a dedicated specific bike case. There's a whole bunch of these. They usually make it so that, you take your wheels off and then the frame more or less fits. There's often like special pockets for everything. The problem with that is they're very heavy, so you're always going to be overweight. So if you are comfortable paying like $500 for a fancy case and then hundreds more dollars to transport it, then that's all you. But I'm trying to not spend that kind of money when I'm traveling. Anyway, let me know in the comments if this video is helpful, if how you do it, and if there are methods that work better that I missed. Thank you for watching.